Welcome to your horror podcast. Here, you will not only listen to real stories that will chill you to the bone, but you will also learn and expand your English vocabulary. Remember, you can enjoy this tale with your headphones on or while doing your chores. Get comfortable and enjoy the story. The claimed reflection. My grandmother passed away when I was 13. The house was one of those old constructions with high ceilings that seemed to trap the cold even in summer. They decided to hold the wake there in the main living room. The dark wooden coffin rested on two stands, surrounded by wreaths of flowers whose sweet, rotten scent seeped through every hallway, suffocating the air. Near midnight, exhaustion mixed with an unease I couldn't shake. The murmurs of the rosary and my aunt's muffled sobs felt distant. I needed to get out. The bathroom was in the yard, a raw concrete structure separated from the house by a stretch of absolute darkness. It had no door, only a thick plastic curtain that rhythmically slapped against the frame in the wind. I sat in the dimness, listening to the croaking of toads and the creaking of branches. Suddenly, the silence of the yard was devoured by a presence. I didn't hear footsteps. I heard a dragging sound, as if something heavy were being pulled across the dry. Then a voice pierced through the curtain. "Son, I need to use the bathroom," it whispered. The air left my lungs. It was her voice. The exact tone, the same slow cadence, but with a metallic edge, as if the words weren't coming from a throat, but from a hollow void. I froze, the hairs on my arms standing on end as warmth abandoned my body. I stared at the curtain. At the bottom, where the moonlight barely reached, I saw the tips of black patent leather shoes. They were the same shoes they had dressed her in for the coffin. "Open for me, son." "I'm cold," the voice insisted, now hoarser, more urgent. Minutes stretched like chewing gum. I didn't breathe. My eyes burned from staring at the fabric. Suddenly, the plastic tightened. Long fingers with yellowed nails and ashen skin grabbed the edge of the curtain. The fabric was yanked open. It wasn't accidental. It was violent. A face appeared. It was her, but her eyes were bulging, the pupils reduced to black dots, and her skin stretched tight, as if the muscles beneath had begun to peel away from the bone. But the worst part was the smile. It wasn't joy, it was an inhuman grimace, showing too much gum. A triumphant expression that screamed that whatever was out there was not my grandmother, but something wearing her shell. I screamed, a tear in my throat. When my parents came running into the yard, the figure had dissolved into the shadows, leaving behind only the stench of dead flowers and a burning cold. That same night, they took me out of the house. Years later, my father, with trembling hands around a glass of tequila, confessed the truth. My grandmother was not an ordinary woman. She had made a pact with forces that do not return what they take. She knew that when she died, the collectors would try to claim her body as a vessel. "That's why we performed the mirror ritual," he told me in a whisper. We placed a mirror in front of her cold face before closing the lid. We had to deceive them. We told the darkness that that face belonged only to her, that there was no room for anyone else. We broke the glass to trap her reflection inside and sealed the wood with blessed nails. Now, every time I pass by a mirror in the dark, I avoid glancing at it, because I know that smile I saw in the yard wasn't looking for the bathroom. It was looking for a new reflection to hide in. And sometimes when the house is silent, I hear a faint scratching behind the glass in my room, as if someone is trying to get out. The air of the void. My brother and my cousin were like two halves of the same coin. They were born just months apart and shared that loud laughter that filled our grandparents' house. Everything went dark the summer my cousin drowned. It was a matter of seconds. A brief lapse under my aunt's watch, a sudden silence in the pool that ended in a scream that still echoes in my nightmares. My aunt was never the same again. Her eyes became hollow sockets, and her presence grew heavy, as if she carried the mud from the bottom of that pool. Months later, she showed up at our door. She brought a box wrapped in gray paper. "So he won't be alone," she whispered, handing my brother a life-size rag doll. It had hand-painted features and black button eyes that seemed to absorb the light in the room. My mother felt a chill, a stab of intuition she ignored out of compassion, but the toy was not normal. It felt strangely heavy to the touch and gave off a stale smell, like basement dampness or freshly turned earth. My brother, in his innocence, named it after our deceased cousin and began sleeping with it. The decay came quickly. Within 3 days, my brother's room turned into a block of ice. He began to wither. His cheeks hollowed, and a persistent fever one no thermometer could properly register consumed him. At night, we heard him whispering. He wasn't talking to himself. He seemed to be answering questions no one else could hear. He says, "I should move, Mom." He says the space in the bed isn't just mine, he mumbled in his sleep, his eyes fixed on the doll sitting in the rocking chair, whose shadow on the wall seemed to have fingers that were far too long. The night of the collapse felt endless. An inhuman scream woke us all. We ran to the room and found my brother in a corner, trembling, with thin scratches on his calves. The doll wasn't in the chair, it was on the bed, lying on its back in the exact spot where my brother should have been sleeping. My mother, seized by a protective fury, grabbed the toy by the neck. As she did, she felt a hard lump in its back. With a kitchen knife, she tore the seam open. What fell to the floor froze our blood, a bundle of black cloth tied with red thread and blind knots. Inside was a mixture of black soil that smelled rotten, clumps of human hair, and an old photograph of my brother with his eyes pierced by pins. But the most terrifying thing was a small piece of clothing, a fragment of the swimsuit my cousin was wearing the day he died. The fire in the yard that night was not normal. The flames were green and blue, and the doll took hours to burn, emitting a sound like a hiss of pain as the plastic of its button eyes melted. My brother recovered, but silence fell over the family. Years later, a great-aunt confessed what we all suspected, but no one dared to name. My aunt didn't want to comfort my brother. She wanted to exchange them. In her madness and envy, she tried to use that doll as an anchor so that the entity that took her son could find a new body, allowing the void of her loss to be filled with the misfortune of our home. Sometimes when I visit my brother, I notice he still avoids looking at the dark corners of rooms. And when we pass by my aunt's house, we see her there, sitting on the porch, staring in our direction with an empty hand stroking the air, as if she were still waiting for her gift to return with a soul inside. The Feast of Shadows. My grandmother did not fear the living, and she treated the dead with distant courtesy. But witches, those heavy-footed women, she hated with an ancient sharpness, like the machete she kept hidden under her pillow. In the village, the air would turn stale whenever a woman became pregnant. It was said that the Tlawelpuchi could smell new blood from the hills and would descend transformed into deformed turkeys, birds with feathers as black as oil and eyes that shone with a hungry human intelligence. When my aunt became pregnant with twins, the atmosphere in the house changed. It no longer smelled like coffee, but of sulfur and rue. My grandmother stationed herself at the entrance like a sentinel. At night, the silence of the countryside was broken by a rhythmic sound. Clock, clock, clock. Huge birds would perch on the yard's wall, staring at her, their bare, purplish necks trembling in the dark. "If you come back tomorrow, I'll turn you into mole," my grandmother shouted into the void, driving a knife into the dirt. The turkeys disappeared, but something worse took their place. At 3 a.m, the metal and tile roof would begin to creak. It wasn't the wind. It was footsteps slow, deliberate, sa-sa-sa-chich, sa-sa-sa-chich, as if bird claws, but carrying the weight of a person, walked directly above the pregnant woman's bed. My grandmother, with a hunter's patience, set a large enamel pot to boil. When the steam filled the kitchen, she climbed onto the roof using a ladder. A piercing shriek starting as a squawk and ending as the wail of a dying woman split the night. She always said she saw a white silhouette, burned and gleaming skin fleeing into the brush, leaving behind a trail of sparse hair and black blood. But the entity did not give up. A witch's hunger for unborn life is endless. On the final night, my grandmother didn't use water. She used a fishing net blessed with salt and prayers spoken backward. When the roof creaked again, the net flew like a silver web. What it caught did not shriek. It made a dry sound, a clacking of teeth that did not belong in a bird's beak. It was a turkey of impossible size, whose wings, as it struggled, had the strength of human arms. My grandmother did not hesitate. With the same pride she later used to tell the story, she said that night the yard filled with a strange, sweet smell as she plucked the creature. Beneath the feathers, the flesh was not red, but grayish, and the bones were too long, almost like a child's femurs. She kept her promise. She made mole. The kitchen filled with an aroma that both attracted and repelled. No one in the family dared approach the table. Only my aunt, driven by a fierce and unnatural craving, devoured the dish with a desperation that frightened everyone present. She ate in silence, eyes lost, while the fetuses in her womb moved violently, stretching her skin to the brink of tearing. Years later, my cousin was born. He was always different. His eyes were not entirely dark. Sometimes, under sunlight, they seemed to carry that same yellow, predatory gleam of nocturnal birds. He has a look that borders on the impossible, as if fate itself fears him. But the most unsettling thing happens when he is alone. Sometimes my cousin stares at the ceiling with absolute fixation. And when we ask him what he sees, he just smiles in that strange way and says, nothing. I just hear my aunts calling me from above. And remember, these stories are based on real events. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoy horror stories, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. This is your channel to learn English while enjoying terrifying stories. See you in the next video. Good night and sweet nightmares.